There are places in Okinawa where the war never truly ended. Not in the history books, not in the memorials, and not in the memories of those who survived it. The Battle of Okinawa ended in June of 1945. But for some people, the war continued long after the guns fell silent. There are stories of soldiers hearing footsteps in abandoned tunnels, whispers coming from caves that have been sealed for decades, and sometimes people claim to see figures walking across the fields at night. Men dressed in uniforms that no longer exist, men carrying rifles that haven't been fired in generations. Most people dismiss these stories. They say it's the darkness, the wind, their imagination. But one Marine stationed on Okinawa in the years after the war believed he knew the difference between imagination and something that was truly there. His name was Daniel Mercer, and this is the story of the soldier who never left. Daniel had only been on Okinawa for a few months when he first saw him. It was late in the evening. The sun had already disappeared behind the hills, leaving the sky a deep blue-gray. Daniel was assigned to a small Marine position in southern Okinawa. The area had once been part of the battlefield. Even years after the war, reminders of the fighting were everywhere. Rusting ammunition boxes, pieces of twisted metal, collapsed trenches, and caves carved deep into the limestone hills. Some were marked, others were not. The locals knew better than to enter many of them. Daniel had heard the stories, everyone had. But like most young Marines, he didn't think much about them. That night, Daniel was walking back toward his barracks after finishing his duties. It was around midnight. The air was unusually still. No insects, no wind, nothing. Then Daniel noticed something moving near the tree line. At first he thought it was another Marine, a man standing alone in the darkness. Daniel stopped. The figure was about 100 yards away. He was facing Daniel, just standing there. Daniel couldn't see his face, but he could see the uniform. It wasn't American. The figure appeared to be wearing an old Japanese military uniform. Daniel stared at him. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Daniel called out, "Hey." The figure didn't respond. Daniel took a step forward. The figure remained perfectly still. Daniel took another. And then something strange happened. The man disappeared. Not walked or ran away, just disappeared. 1 second he was standing beneath the trees. The next, nothing. Daniel stood there alone. He told himself it was exhaustion. A shadow, maybe a local farmer, maybe his eyes had simply played a trick on him. He continued walking, but as he reached the barracks, he looked back. And there he was. The soldier was standing at the edge of the tree line again, watching him. Daniel didn't tell anyone. Not at first. He knew exactly what would happen. The other Marines would laugh. Someone would call him crazy. So he kept the experience to himself. 3 nights later, it happened again. Same time, same location, same soldier. This time, Daniel noticed something different. The man wasn't looking at him. He was looking toward a hill, a small limestone ridge several hundred yards away. At the base of that ridge was an old cave. Daniel had seen it before. The entrance was partially collapsed. There was no sign indicating what was inside. Daniel had never asked. But now the soldier was staring directly at it. Daniel watched him. Then the soldier slowly raised one arm. He pointed toward the cave. Daniel felt a chill run through him. The figure lowered his arm and disappeared again. Daniel stood there for several minutes. Then he walked back to the barracks. That night he couldn't sleep. The following morning he asked one of the older Marines about the cave. The Marine's expression changed immediately. "You don't want to go in there." Daniel laughed. "Why?" The Marine looked at him. "Because people went in there during the war." Daniel waited. "And?" The Marine shook his head. "Nobody knows exactly what happened." That answer bothered Daniel more than it should have. A few days later, Daniel finally told two of his closest friends, Corporal James Harlan and Private First Class Eddie Collins. They listened without laughing, at least at first. "You saw a Japanese soldier?" Daniel nodded. 3 times. Harlan looked toward the window. "Did he say anything?" "No." "Did he move?" "Once." "Where?" Daniel pointed toward the distant hill. He pointed at the cave. Eddie smiled nervously. "Maybe he wants you to go inside." Daniel stared at him. "That's not funny." Eddie's smile disappeared. "Yeah, I know." That night, the 3 Marines decided to investigate. Not because they believed Daniel, at least that's what they told themselves. They simply wanted to prove there was a logical explanation. They waited until after midnight. Then they left the barracks carrying flashlights. The walk to the cave took nearly 20 minutes. The darkness felt different that night. Heavy, almost suffocating. When they reached the entrance, they stopped. The cave was smaller than Daniel remembered. The opening was barely wide enough for one person. Harlan shined his flashlight inside. The beam disappeared into darkness. "Let's take a look," Eddie said. They entered. The air immediately became colder. The smell was terrible. Old earth, damp stone, and something else, something metallic. They moved deeper. The cave narrowed, then widened. Their footsteps echoed against the walls. After several minutes, they found evidence that someone had been there during the war. A rusted helmet, an empty ammunition box, a broken canteen. Then Harlan's flashlight stopped. He stared at the ground. There were footprints. Fresh footprints. Daniel looked at them. They were human, bare feet, small. And they continued deeper into the cave. "Those weren't here when we came in," Eddie whispered. Nobody answered. Then they heard something. A voice, very faint, coming from somewhere deeper inside. Daniel couldn't understand the words. It sounded like someone whispering. Harlan raised his flashlight. "Hello?" The whisper stopped. Silence. Then came 3 knocks. From somewhere in the darkness, Eddie stepped backward. "Let's go." Harlan didn't move. Then they heard the sound again. This time, it was closer. Daniel turned. Behind them stood the Japanese soldier. He was only a few feet away. His uniform was torn, his face was pale, and his eyes were completely black. Daniel froze. The soldier stared directly at him. Then he whispered something. Daniel couldn't understand the language, but he understood one word. A name. Mercer. Daniel's heart stopped. The soldier knew his name. Then the lights went out. Daniel remembered screaming. He remembered running. He remembered Eddie grabbing his arm. Then nothing. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was lying outside the cave. Harlan was beside him. Eddie was sitting several feet away. All three were alive. None of them could explain how they had gotten outside. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, Harlan asked the question that had been haunting Daniel. Did you see him? Daniel looked at him. Who? The soldier. Daniel's blood ran cold. You saw him? Harlan nodded. Eddie looked at both of them. I saw him too. The three men stared at each other. They didn't discuss it again. They returned to the barracks, but the story didn't end there. The next morning, Daniel went looking for answers. He found an Okinawan man who worked near the base. His name was Nakamura. Daniel asked him about the cave. The old man immediately refused to talk about it. But when Daniel mentioned the Japanese soldier, Nakamura became pale. You saw him? Daniel nodded. Nakamura looked around before speaking. My grandfather told me about that place. What happened there? The old man hesitated. During the battle, Japanese soldiers used the cave. Daniel waited. There were soldiers inside, Nakamura continued, but there were also civilians. Women, children, old people. They were hiding from the fighting. Daniel's stomach tightened. What happened? Nakamura looked toward the hills. American forces surrounded the area. He paused. The soldiers inside refused to surrender. Daniel already knew what came next. But the cave was attacked? Nakamura shook his head. No. He looked directly at Daniel. The soldiers inside killed themselves. Daniel said nothing. They believed the Americans were coming. Nakamura continued. They believed everyone would be captured. His voice became quieter. So they made a decision. What decision? Nakamura looked away. They sealed the entrance. Daniel felt a cold sensation move through him. From the inside? Nakamura nodded. Then they waited. For what? The end. Daniel stared at the old man. How many people? Nakamura shook his head. Nobody knows. Daniel thought about the soldier, the uniform, the black eyes, the cave. What about the soldier? Nakamura's expression changed. Which soldier? The one I saw. Nakamura's voice dropped to a whisper. Did he point toward the cave? Daniel nodded. Then he is still looking for them. Looking for who? Nakamura didn't answer. Instead, he asked Daniel a question. Did he speak your name? Daniel froze. How did you know? The old man's eyes filled with fear. Because you are not the first. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. At approximately 2:17 in the morning, he heard footsteps outside. Slow, measured, crunching against the gravel. He sat up. The footsteps stopped. Daniel looked toward the window. A figure stood outside. The Japanese soldier. Daniel grabbed his boots and went outside. The soldier was standing exactly where Daniel had first seen him, but this time, something was different. He wasn't looking toward the cave. He was looking directly at Daniel. Then he turned and began walking. Daniel followed. The soldier moved silently through the darkness. Daniel followed him toward the hill. The farther they walked, the colder the air became. Then the soldier stopped. Daniel was standing in front of the cave. The soldier turned toward him and slowly stepped backward into the darkness. Daniel raised his flashlight. The beam entered the cave. The soldier was gone. But Daniel heard something, a sound coming from deep inside. Crying, a child crying. Then another voice, a woman, then another, and another. The cave was filled with whispers. Daniel backed away. Then something hit the ground near his feet. He looked down. A small metal object, a Japanese military identification tag. Daniel picked it up. There was a name engraved on it. He couldn't read the Japanese characters, but underneath them was something he could understand. A date, June 22nd, 1945. 3 days after the official end of the Battle of Okinawa. Daniel stared at the date. The war was over, but the people inside that cave hadn't known it. They had died believing the battle was still happening. Daniel dropped the tag and ran. The next morning, Daniel returned with Harlan and Eddie, but the cave was different. The entrance was completely sealed. Not partially collapsed, not blocked, sealed. Solid rock. There was no opening, no way inside. They searched the area. Nothing, no footprints, no identification tag, no evidence that they had ever been there. Daniel eventually asked Nakamura about the date. The old man listened. Then he said something Daniel would never forget. June 22nd. Daniel nodded. That was the day many people in Okinawa finally realized the fighting was over. Nakamura looked toward the hills, but not everyone. Daniel understood. The soldier had never known the war had ended. He had spent decades waiting for an enemy that would never come, waiting for orders that would never arrive, waiting for someone to tell him it was finally safe to leave. But Daniel still didn't understand one thing. Why had the soldier called his name? Nakamura had no answer. At least, not one he was willing to give.